Hello, I'm Carolyn Ehrlich, the Chief of Staff here in Woodbridge, and we are all gathered here today to talk about a very important act that is being introduced in Washington, D.C. Congressman Pallone, who is always a friend of Woodbridge and the whole district, and now, today, clearly the whole country, looked during Sandy and after Sandy. He made sure that he played a big role in our recovery. But the job did not stop, because then what he, along with the FCC, did was looked at what happened and took the lessons that were learned and now is turning it into legislation so that moving forward, if unfortunately there is another type of a Sandy event, we are more prepared for it. So I'm going to let you talk about it further, but before I do, I just want to introduce our emergency management team. Captain Roy Hoppeck, Police Deputy Director Joe Nitsky, and Police Director Bob Hubner. Pat Kenny, here he is, our Director of OEM, and Scott Kuzma, who takes care of Police Telecommunications. Congressman Pallone.
Thank you, Carol. First of all, let me thank Carol and Mayor McCormick for inviting us here today. I was explaining to David Goldman, who came up from D.C., who deals with the telecommunications issues on the Energy and Commerce Committee, as well as with the FCC Commissioner, what a wonderful place this community center is. But all they had to do was walk in and see it, and I didn't even have to say anything to them. And I explained to them that this is really not only the place that you would go to in the event of a natural disaster, where they would operate any kind of effort, the effort that takes place during a natural disaster, but it's also the place where people come for all kinds of recreational activities. But the reason we're here today is because it is the command center, Carol, if that's how I can describe it, in the event in the emergency shelter in the event of a natural disaster. And Pat Kenny's going to take us, I have to remember this, he's going to take us out to look at the vehicles after we're done with the press conference today. And of course, the media is invited to come with us as well. As Carol mentioned, the reason I came today is because 3 years ago when Superstorm Sandy hit, one of the things that frankly surprised me was that a lot of the communications that we rely on basically were not there. What we're finding, of course, is that fewer and fewer people even have hard lines, and more people depend on cell phones or internet or other types of communication, many of which were simply not available in the first few days of the storm. And so it was natural for me to say, well, what can we do in the future to make sure that that doesn't happen again? And one of just a couple of examples that constantly came in mind were that I think there was using cell phones. I don't remember which one exactly now, but one of I don't know if I had the Verizon phone or somebody else had the AT&T. One of them, the whole system went down, and of course, if you had Verizon, you couldn't use AT&T or vice versa. And so one of the things that we're talking about here is being able to use another network with your cell phone if your network is not operating in the event of disaster. The other thing, too, is to be able to go to hotspots, if you will, or for Wi-Fi centers where you don't need a password, which you would normally use in the event of disaster, so that you can go there, for an emergency and be able to communicate. These are just some of the things that we noticed during the storm that were a major problem that we're trying to correct in an effort to try to create more resiliency if we have another storm. Now, I assure you that when we came here today, or when we set up this event today, we were not at all aware that there might be a snowstorm coming our way in a couple of days. And I'm hoping we still don't get it, frankly. But it's sort of appropriate in a way that we're here, because we are hearing all these warnings about a major storm that might hit New Jersey and the whole East Coast, possibly as early as Friday, but hopefully not. I think that the one thing that there were so many things that came out of Sandy, and we're not even done with Sandy. I mean, there's still people in a lot of the towns that I represent, where the homes or the businesses are not back. They're still trying to get money from the federal government to help them rebuild. So this isn't just something that we're talking about in the past. But the whole public infrastructure, this is the communications infrastructure that we're talking about today. But the whole public infrastructure is something that we've been looking at and trying to deal with. Carol knows that in Woodbridge, we've been talking about in the Port Reading area, trying to do some kind of flood control project there for the future. But the communications sector, I think, is a very important part of that. Because we depend so much on these communication networks in the event of a natural disaster. So the bill that I'm introducing is actually called the Sandy Act, appropriately so. And I just wanted to give you a little information. I may have to just reference my notes here about some of the things that we're trying to accomplish with this. And I should also mention, for today I can mention for the first time that we have 3 new members of Congress from New Jersey who have co-sponsored the act. That's Congressman Albio Series, Congressman Bill Pascrell, and Congresswoman Bonnie Watson-Coleman, all within the last few days have indicated that they're going to be co-sponsors, and I want to thank them as well. But just give a little bit of background. At its peak, Sandy knocked offline nearly 25% of the cell sites in its path, with more than 50% offline in the hardest hit counties. In New Jersey, 40% of cell sites were down statewide. So just give you an idea. Well, what the Sandy Act does, if I could just mention a few things, is first it makes sure that during an emergency, consumer cell phones work on other carriers, as I mentioned, if their own networks go down, giving priority to calls to 911 services and emergency alerts, increases coordination between wireless carriers, utilities, and public safety officials by creating a directory of the contact information for relevant disaster response officials, begins the process to provide 911 services over Wi-Fi hotspots, and make sure all communications providers, radio, TV, and phone, can fix outages faster, even across state lines. And finally, we launch an expansive study of the future of network resiliency. In September, David Goldman came down, and we had a field hearing in Monmouth Beach, where we had a lot of the different groups that are involved in communications, including the FirstNet. We basically were there for like 2 or 3 hours trying to get whatever information we can and recommendations about what we should do in putting together this legislation. So the legislation basically was a response to not only what we learned in the aftermath of the storm, but also what we learned at that field hearing that we had in September. So I just wanted to again mention that I feel very strongly that, and I hate to say it, but I guess the storm this weekend, if it comes as an indication of it, because we know that we're experiencing global warming, and we know that there are a lot more natural disasters that are occurring and more severe storms that are occurring. David, I think you said when we came in, what did you say about the 2015 was what, the warmest?
Record high year.
The record high temperature, right? Worldwide, nationwide? Globally. So, we can sit here and say, well, we hope that these storms don't occur, and I certainly hope that we don't see one this weekend. But the reality is, as you just, pick up the newspaper or watch TV, you know that there are more and more natural disasters occurring, and they seem to be more severe every time. So we need to be prepared, and this effort to deal with the communications sector, I think, is an important part of that. Now, I want to introduce next Jessica Rosenworcel. She is one of the FCC commissioners. I hate to say it that way because I like you better than the others, but I guess I better not put that on record. In any case, the FCC has been before the Energy. I guess I should mention the Energy and Commerce Committee, which is the committee that I sit on in the House of Representatives, is the committee that deals with telecommunications and the internet issues, as well as environmental issues, energy issues, health issues, whatever. So we've had some hearings in the committee over the last couple of years where the FCC and Jessica came in, and actually the entire FCC, all the commissioners were there, including the chairman. And we brought up in the course of that our concerns over communications problems during storms such as Sandy. And Jessica was, always there responding. So was Chairman Wheeler, I have to say, and giving us ideas that also were part of this bill. And she was here. Would you come the next day? When were
About
you?
a week later.
She came about a week after Sandy and discussed some of these things when she came to New Jersey at the time. So I'm very pleased that she's here today, because not only because of all the things she does with the FCC that are helpful to the average American, but particularly because she's taken a lead on a lot of these issues that we're discussing with the Sandy Act. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Congressman Pallone. Thank you, Carol. Thank you to the town of Woodbridge. It's good not to be in Washington. And it's nice to be in New Jersey, where I spent a little bit of my childhood, so I know a little bit about New Jersey community. But I saw a lot more of that firsthand when, after Superstorm Sandy, I toured some of the New Jersey coast with public safety officials. And I don't think I'll ever forget what I saw. The storm surge and how it pushed sand and rocks blocks away from the beachfront with absolutely cruel disregard for the homes and businesses that were in their way. But we also saw a lot of people deeply committed to their communities, to rebuilding and remaking their homes and businesses. And because it's what I do professionally, we looked at communications networks. We found in many ways they worked, but in some ways they did not. And that network resiliency wasn't all that it could be. As you heard Congressman Pallone tell you, throughout the entire path of Hurricane Sandy, 25% of our cell towers were out of service. But in New Jersey, that number was 40%. I think we can do better. I think we need to, because one thing's for certain, Mother Nature's wrath will hit us again in New Jersey or in any other state. And so the terrific thing about the Sandy Act is it takes the lessons from that storm and applies them not just here in New Jersey, but to the rest of the country. It will make our communications networks stronger, it will make our public safety officials stronger, and it will help all of our communities stay more safe. So I think it's a terrific piece of legislation, and one I look forward to one day being signed into law.
Thank you. And thank you so much for being here today and all that you did in the aftermath of Sandy. The Commissioner mentioned signing into law. I mean, obviously, we've just introduced this bill, and we're trying to get members of Congress, bipartisan, to co-sponsor it. That's why I mentioned the 3 New Jersey members who recently signed on. But, we have to go through the committee and go to the floor and get the Senate to act as well. But we are determined, as Jessica mentioned, to get this signed into law. And certainly having the support of the FCC and Jessica is an important part of that. So any questions that any of you might have before we go outside? Sure.
Pending the passage of the legislation, is there a projected timeline for implementing some of these goals?
Well, we actually have, the legislation, of course, has no timeline. We would obviously try to get it passed in this session of Congress. We're in the second year of the 2-year session. But I'd be overly ambitious to say that we can accomplish that, within the next 9 months before election. And if we don't, then obviously we'd reintroduce it. But I don't want you to get the impression that the FCC and as well as the state and towns haven't tried very hard and had some success in dealing with and creating more resiliency and addressing some of these issues while we're still trying to move the legislation. I don't know, David, I wasn't going to ask you to speak, and I see you running away, but did you want to comment a little bit on some of the things that have actually happened? I mean, even since we had the hearing back in September, I mean, obviously, or maybe you, Jessica, but I mean, this isn't just our bill. I mean, there's been an effort by the federal government and the state to try to deal with some of these issues effectively. I mean, you want to just comment on it? You don't have to.
No, sure, we can.
Why don't you come up here? I knew he was running away because he didn't know I was going to ask him. But.
Hi, thanks. we've had a lot of, so I'm David Goldman. I work for Congressman Pallone on the committee doing telecommunications issues. Since we first introduced the act, we've had a lot of productive conversations with industry, where I think they have been, various industries, the cable industry, the broadcasting industry, and wireless providers have all been enthusiastic about the ideas that are in this bill, and I think a lot of the companies involved have been pushing to try to get to doing some of the things that are being suggested that Congressman Pallone had talked about already. But as far as the specific timelines, whenever it passes, after that, the various parts have slightly different timelines on them. But all of it would happen within 6 months to a year after passage.
And David just reminded me, too, I should have mentioned, I didn't mention broadcasters. I mean, obviously, we also understand the, I've been talking about internet and cell phones, but we understand the role that the broadcasters played in this as well. And, that's, trying to create more resiliency for them and address their concerns as part of this as well. And they've been very responsive, too, to some of the concerns that came in the aftermath of Sandy. So I didn't mean to leave them out.
And just one more to follow up either for yourself, Congressman, do you have a sense of the percentage of cell towers that are already shared by major carriers, and are we talking about erecting more cell towers to be able to compensate for this?
You mean, how do you actually effectuate? I don't know how. Do you want
Percentage.
either one of you?
Yeah.
I don't have a percentage on towers that are shared, but I think what the bill does is not necessarily require the carriers to share towers as much as if one network goes down, that the customers from that network can move on to other carriers' networks. So if you subscribe to a certain carrier that gets knocked out during the storm, but there's another carrier that their network still works, the consumers shouldn't be the ones who are left with no service during the storm if there's still a network that's up that they can use. So it's not so much about sharing the infrastructure as being able to jump from one carrier to another during an emergency to make sure that people can access 911, call for help, call their loved ones no matter what.
But not to be a stickler, ostensibly, though, you would need to create more bandwidth. Yes? I mean, if a carrier is having issues with their customers, it's a bandwidth issue, yes, and you would still need to create more?
The network could go down because of the storm damage. That's one possibility. If you moved all the customers from one network to another network, there could potentially be bandwidth issues on the other network. But that's why actually Congressman Pallone has been a leader on trying to get more airwaves to the carriers in order to make sure that they all have enough bandwidth to be able to handle these kind of situations.
Janice, what was I know maybe I shouldn't even say it, but I can't help myself. It was Verizon that worked and AT&T that didn't, right? Yeah, so that's, if you remember, if you had Verizon, you were okay, but if you had AT&T, you couldn't use it. And that was, a big issue as you were traveling around, who had what. So that's what we're trying to address. Anybody else? All right, we're going to go outside. Pat, take us outside. Thanks a lot.
During Hurricane Sandy, when we were out evacuating neighborhoods before the floods, we would set this truck up there and we could have our evacuation team set up in there, the sheltering, somebody commuting back and forth here for the shelter to say how many people were coming. We have radio inoperability to talk to all fire, EMS, police. We actually have phone service in here. We have TVs, we have cameras. We can video conference from different people if we had to. We use it in all emergency disasters in our town. It's our mobile command post out on the scene. It's been very effective. If for some reason our police dispatch was to go down or we lost power in our police dispatch, we could pull this truck up in the front of town hall. We could run cables into the building, and we would actually have 4 different 911 consoles set up in there with laptops if we had to. And it's been very effective for us. There's only, in the county of Middlesex, there's 2 big ones, which is the county has one. We have the next biggest one, and then some of the towns have smaller command trucks that they use in their different organizations.
Can I ask you, when I remember in the aftermath of Sandy, like within a couple of days, we had a forum at Middlesex County College. And it wasn't, we weren't just talking about Middlesex County, it was statewide, and even with New York, that there was, the police were talking about lack of interoperability,
To talk
between
amongst each other.
Yeah, amongst themselves,
Yes.
even though they're. And I understand that that's been corrected for the most
It's
part. Right?
on the state police end. It's starting to be worked upon. Now what we have is we have like a shared radio system.
Yeah.
We're on one frequency. The county's on another frequency, and we all have different. We share radios.
Yeah.
I give our radios to the county, so this way they can communicate with us. The county gives me a radio, so we can communicate back with them. And our local towns, what we're fortunate enough in Woodbridge, when we went to our new radio system, we actually had bought extra radios. So if other towns that couldn't communicate had to come in to work in our town or help us out, we're able to give them radios on our frequency that we can communicate.
So a lot of that has been cleared up. Not just in here, but generally statewide.
Generally, yeah. I know the state police have really cleared up a lot.
Yeah.
And they're still working forward to getting even more done. So it's even easier.
Good, good. All right, thanks.
So this is where you'd run your 911
This is where the
out. You had to do
911
it
would run out.
remotely.
Correct. You
Right.
run it right out of here. Then in the back is like a conference room. When we have different hostage situations or active shooters going on, we would use this. Our hostage negotiation team would work out here. The tactical command of SWAT would be in the back, so they could communicate back and forth and let the field guys know what's going on with the suspect or whoever it is in the buildings. So it works out very well because everybody's together, and this way everybody's working hand in hand, so everybody knows what's going on instead of one area being in another truck, somebody else being in a building. Everybody's right here on scene, so it's easier to work.
Sure.
And we did that with the shelter in Hurricane Sandy. Eventually, after everybody was here, we actually relocated the truck here so that the shelter coordinator that was running our shelter, we had over 250 people in a shelter in the gymnasium in the
They
room
were
right
used here.
Yeah.
I didn't represent Woodbridge at the time,
Oh.
so I didn't come to Woodbridge.
Yeah,
But I
it was
assumed it
we were
the
actually
shelter.
a countywide shelter. We were
Yeah.
actually a medical countywide assisted shelter where we were getting medical patients. We had a whole triage area set up upstairs for medical patients, and then we had everybody else
And
set
how
up.
long did that last?
7 days.
7 days.
We were in operation for 7 days, and then we downsized it, and then the county actually opened up a medical shelter at Middlesex County College.
Mm-hmm.
So all medical went up there because there was nursing homes that had no power, no generators, so they were moving everybody around as much as they could.
So do other towns have vehicles like this? And
Some
you
towns
work
have
together
smaller ones.
sometimes?
Yeah, well, I mean, if another town was to need it, if the county one is the one that everybody is able to request through a partnership. If theirs was tied up and somebody needed it, we could do like an interlocal with them, and they can request an assistance from us, and like a mutual aid, we would go with the vehicle, and then we would just have one operator, and then set it up, and then they could. What I like about it is you can bring laptops, you can bring your own stuff, portable stuff in and set up. There's nothing defined in here that says, okay, this is you can only use Woodbridge. It's Woodbridge computers, Woodbridge CAD, Woodbridge radios. Bring your own stuff in, portables and laptops, and set it up yourself and run your own town out of it. So if another municipality, their 911 center went down, we could try to be capable to help them out too.
So you could make this into a 911 peace app
Correct.
for anybody who could
Correct,
get the
on wheels.
connectivity. Wow.
So it works out nice.